After the release of Elden Ring, the possibilities for the Dark Souls or the Soulsborne series are huge and could be amazing or deeply troubling. And today I wanted to talk about what I think is realistically shaping the Dark Souls series moving forward, both good and bad. And I also wanted to talk about the amazing potential that Dark Souls has in so many different directions that can excite almost every single type of fan. And so first I wanted to start off with realistically, what are the factors influencing things moving forward? And why does this really matter? Because I think that understanding these dynamics will help us to understand the quality of the games moving forward and the direction they're taking these games. And so with Elden Ring, there was just this huge amount of money and popularity from this game. And I think that ultimately this is the biggest risk facing the Dark Souls series moving forward. And when I say the Dark Souls series, I'm kind of referring to these Soulsborne games. I'm not necessarily referring to a Dark Souls 4 moment here, but regardless. The biggest risk is this losing identity, in my opinion, because you have this kind of challenge where there is this pressure to want to continue to grow in popularity. You can have these situations where you water down gameplay mechanics, you could change directions of the game, or try to make it more mass appealable, which affects things. And so Elden Ring was very popular, and it kind of went into this open world dynamic. It went into this sense of exploration with the open world, but also added a lot more different gameplay mechanics into the game series. And I think that the recent releases that have come out post Elden Ring are interesting directionally, but concerning in a way. So past Elden Ring, which actually has its kind of shifts away from the core Dark Souls, Bloodborne formula with the open world, with making it a little bit easier to overcome some of the challenges, you have Elden Ring Nightreign, which is kind of this multiplayer experience, which I think a lot of people didn't really like. I didn't really care for that idea with Elden Ring, adding this multiplayer component and this kind of twist on the formula. Some people would just say that that's a spinoff, but regardless. And then you have, of course, the Elden Ring DLC, which was very difficult for a lot of people, and it was not necessarily the most fun for a lot of people. And then, of course, we have the Duskbloods, which has this multiplayer component to it, and it has this weird aesthetic, this different aesthetic on the Nintendo Switch 2. Now, when I look at these releases, I think we have to look at things in a little bit of a different way. So first off, what does Elden Ring Nightreign and the Duskblood have in common? They have this multiplayer component in common. And so to me, that has shown this emphasis in this direction to try to do something with this idea. Of course, we also saw some multiplayer elements within the core Elden Ring formula, a little bit beyond just what you see in Dark Souls games. And so there seems to be this push to some multiplayer aspects. And while some people could say that there is a spinoff to that, I do think that there has been investment probably for some sort of code infrastructure or just putting a lot of time and energy into design philosophy and just efforts that they would love to reuse or expand on or build on in future Dark Souls games. And like I said, when I say Dark Souls, I mean Soulsborne games, but I'm going to just say Dark Souls for simplicity. And so both these games have these multiplayer elements, which I really don't like. But also, I think what you see here too is this interesting dynamic where it's kind of the same graphical style. I mean, when you think of the Switch 2, you don't really think of this super impressive, crazy graphics. And so Elden Ring Nightreign and the Duskbloods seem to have that same level of graphical fidelity. And so that makes me think that these kind of recent games are just taking the existing assets and the existing kind of structure and building off of it. And so hopefully when you have this next Souls game, that will be the next graphical leap and it'll be something entirely different. But at the same time too, I find it hard to think that there won't be some sort of multiplayer component added into the Souls series after this, just because of the time that's been placed into them with Elden Ring Nightreign, with the Duskbloods, and then of course the core Elden Ring games in of itself. I also think that there is just this pressure to probably make the game more mass appealable. I mean, it brought so many people into Soulsborne games, especially people that have never played the Dark Souls games, which if you haven't played those games, you should absolutely play them. Play Dark Souls 1, play Dark Souls 2. I know a lot of people hate Dark Souls 2, but it's actually awesome. They're great games. But I think that that popularity is a big concern of mine because you've seen this with so many game series where things get popular and the older fans are alienated. They kind of move away from them because of this pressure to expand revenue, to expand that popularity. And usually the only way to do that is to water down mechanics because a lot of times they want to grow beyond the success of Elden Ring. But when you look at the core ideas behind Dark Souls and these Soulsborne games, it's just hard to eventually get past a certain point. You have to understand that these games only appeal to certain types of people. There's only so many people that want to play a Dark Souls 3 or a Dark Souls 1 or even an Elden Ring. There's a level of difficulty with the game. There's a level of complexity with the game and challenges in the aesthetic. And so you have to kind of realize that there is a saturation point at some point. And if you move far away from the core ideas that people love about Dark Souls, ultimately you can get to a situation where things get even worse. So I think that the inherent things that maybe prevent Elden Ring or Dark Souls from getting even more popular are the things that made it popular in the first place. It's like with strategy games. There's these very complicated strategy games that are only appealable to so many people, but that complexity and that detail is what people love about those strategy games. Some ideas will always be more popular than others. I hope that there is this understanding of this idea, but we just have to wait and see what happens, because this is the biggest question, in my opinion, beyond the multiplayer components, beyond that, because I think that is the big concern. But I think we saw some directional shifts in Elden Ring from Dark Souls that kind of speak to a little bit more approachability to things. And then I think the other thing too is that there has been these existing systems that they have tried to move closer to, and it's like things like existing systems and trying to expand them in a way directionally, like the mounted combat, the combat moves, and the expansions with magic. But I think it shows where their head's at in terms of trying to mix up the gameplay and maybe combining that with the multiplayer aspects. And we have to remember that there is this existing code base which influences things practically. So if they put all this time and energy into mounted combat, into combat moves, into these magic elements, chances are they want to reuse those assets. They want to reuse that code or expand on it or make it better, or same with the multiplayer infrastructure. And so it makes me think that anytime they put time into these new ideas, they probably want to build on things. But I think that there's going to be some ideas that they have to figure out how they want to deal with them, like the artificial difficulty, especially some of the difficulty that people really didn't like in Elden Ring, Shadow of the Erdtree, where you have this artificial difficulty that people, especially longtime fans of the series, don't like. And there's other dynamics that they have to deal with, like gank squads, or people wanting easy modes, or having this fatigue with just the Simon Says dynamic with the Soulsborne formula. And I think that the other thing too is that there's been a lot of competition from Soulsborne games, at least recently. Now, I don't think that they've reached that same level of passion and awesomeness of the Dark Souls games, but you have seen some moves towards trying to replicate this in some extent, like something like Lies of P or other Soulsborne-like games. Now, they have their own identity, but I don't think that they have really innovated necessarily. They're kind of still trying to catch up to Dark Souls. And so that incentivizes, I think, in a way, the Soulsborne series to try to innovate. And there's so many amazing and awesome ideas that you could do to make the Souls games even better. And I have so many awesome ideas that I'd love to see. So one thing that would be so amazing to see in the Dark Souls games is these dynamic dungeons. I'd love to see dynamic dungeons that are modular, where there's a real opportunity where you could see expanded gameplay or AI, where maybe you have these dungeons, but then there's different ways that the rooms are laid out in the castle, or there's extra towers. And this adds replayability to the game in terms of multiple playthroughs or having a dynamic experience. Think things like Blighttown or Sin's Fortress that were different, and they dynamically changed the way that the game played out, whether it's where certain structures are, or characters or monsters and things like that. I think you could also see things like dynamic modular bosses, where there's a real opportunity to expand the gameplay. Maybe certain bosses have 2 swords instead of 1, or they move faster or slower, or there's a poison dynamic. There's a lot of possibilities with this modularity, I think, that they could go in with the Soulsborne series, or just another game that's not even a Dark Souls game. And I think that it's just so awesome, because you want to see this expansion into the dungeons, where you have some of these fond memories of things like Sin's Fortress or Blighttown, where you have these amazing experiences with these crazy boss fights like Fume Knight. It's one of my favorite boss fights in the entire Dark Souls series. And so you want these experiences, and I think that you could have them even expanded further with these modular mechanics. I also think you could have expanded gameplay mechanics, where you could twist the expanded formula up, where what if you, for example, beat the game and then you expanded it into a more roguelike experience. Maybe there was a hardcore mode where you only had so many lives, or the world changed, or there was expanded RPG mechanics for role-playing, exploration. There was unique puzzle mechanics that got you unique swords or weapons, or there's unique boss encounters, or twists on the existing formula. So you have the core Dark Souls game experience, but then when you beat the game, it's like a new game plus, but it mixes things up dramatically, or there's a hardcore mode that makes things really hard or really complicated. So that first mode, right, that first story playthrough, maybe that is where you can get more of the casual audience. But then when you play the game that second time, that's when the real game starts up, where you have new bosses, you have harder boss fights, you have this modularity that I talked about earlier, which could be really crazy and a lot of fans would appreciate. So you have the best of both worlds, where you have the more casual audience enjoying things and then the more hardcore Souls audience loving things as well. And I think there's also this huge opportunity for PvP. And I know that PvP hasn't necessarily been the most popular thing in the Dark Souls series, but especially when you see these expanded multiplayer mechanics, you can see the opportunities, where I always feel like it would be amazing if there was a more of a ranking and progression system within the PvP world. You can make it more fun and approachable to people with these ranks. You could have some sort of process to speed up the matchmaking process, to make it a more better and more flowed process rather than waiting a bunch. And then you can also have these crazy PvP or PvE experiences to change up the dynamic a lot, especially with those second playthrough ideas that I talked about just a minute ago. Those PvP experiences could really change things up dramatically. You could even have a separate mode to maybe make things like a battle royale mode, where you had to fight each other in these castles or something like that. That could really add a lot of dynamics to the PvP. And so even though PvP has kind of been an afterthought in some respects for the Dark Souls games, I think there's a huge opportunity to make it even more popular. And then there's so many opportunities to make that an even expanded component with the Souls games. So that's a huge opportunity. And same with going and expanding the RPG mechanics, going beyond just Fashion Souls and really looking into new RPG mechanics, whether it's with stats or things like that, to make the games even more dynamic. And so I think that these expanded gameplay mechanics, these PvP opportunities, these RPG mechanics, these modularities could take the Soulsborne formula to another level, especially when competitors are trying to just catch up to that same energy and soul that the Dark Souls games have. And so I think there's a ton of opportunities for Dark Souls. It really just depends on what the company does after the massive success of Elden Ring and how things are going to change, because there's so many copycats right now. I think there's a real opportunity to expand things, and we'll just have to wait and see if that success ultimately takes things to a new amazing level or causes a whole downfall for the series. And hey, if you like this video, consider subscribing and check out some of the content on my channel. I do a lot of awesome videos on video games. Take a look if you're interested, and I will see you in the next video.